You are listening to DecayMag.com. Staff Correspondent, Stacy Cox. Exclusive interview with Tory Haas, director, writer, for The Neon Dead.
My name is Stacy Cox, staff correspondent for DecayMag.com. Joining me today is visual guru, writer, director, Tory Haas. Scheduled for release on September 13th is Tory Haas's comedy horror, The Neon Dead. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to meet with me today, Mr. Haas.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for talking to me.
So Neon Dead is your first horror feature film, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's my first. I did several shorts, but this was the first feature.
What differences, if any, did you come across when making the transition from short films to a full feature?
You know, I had done so many shorts beforehand. Like, in terms of the production experience, it was really just like making a collection of shorts. Especially in our scenario, because our budget was so low and we were shooting on weekends. So it would be like every, month we were making 2 short films, basically, shooting on weekends only. So in that sense, it wasn't really any different. In terms of writing and structuring it, it was obviously very different to go from like a short form to a long form. And, thankfully, I studied screenwriting a lot. It's actually how I first started making movies, is I started writing just in my spare time. So I think we had a pretty good script going in. I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I was pretty proud of the script overall.
Mr. Haas, I see you're a big advocate for the horror genre. Would you care to share what started your venture into horror?
Oh, I've loved horror movies my whole life. I can't even honestly say for sure what started it. I think a big catalyst, though, might have been when I was, it was before I even started school. I don't know what year Pet Sematary came out, but my mom took me to see Pet Sematary, and this was like before I was in kindergarten, I'm pretty sure. And I think I only made it through about 10 minutes of it, and nothing scary even happened, and my mom had to take me out of the theater. She missed the movie. But I don't know if that had some kind of effect on my psyche. And also my grandfather, growing up, he would always show me the old dinosaur movies, King Kong, the Ray Harryhausen Sinbad movies. So I grew up watching all those influences. And again, going back to my mom, she loves horror. She watches horror movies all the time. We have a whole collection of, horror novels. So I've just been exposed to it my whole life, and I've always loved it. I've always loved monsters and creatures and really all kinds of horror. The Neon Dead's a more fun, kind of 80s style horror movie, but, in my collection I have, everything from, the classics to, Italian cannibal movies. I love all kinds of horror, totally.
While we're on the subject of monsters, I was looking over your filmography, and it appears that you dwell heavy on demons and monsters. Do you plan to venture off into other horror subgenres?
I would like to eventually, and actually my next project I'm working on is, I believe it's doing that. I don't know, we have a character in it, and I'm not sure if she's quite a monster or not. She was a human once, and she's been abused for a long period of time. So she doesn't look human anymore. I don't know if you classify that as a monster, but it's definitely going to be a darker, more psychological type of horror than what I've done in the past. So answering your question, yes, I do plan to venture off into it. And eventually I would love to honestly tackle all kinds of horror. Like I said, I'm just such a huge fan of all of it. I mean, monster stuff is my favorite. I love monster movies. I was a monster kid growing up. But, just loving all kinds of horror, I want to try a little bit of everything at some point and just see how it turns out.
That sounds very exciting. And your career in the field of visual effects is extensive. What attracted you to be behind the lens in this point of your career?
Well, when I first got into film, I actually wanted to be a visual effects artist. Because I originally, when I saw Jurassic Park, I guess I was 10 then. It just blew my mind. Before that, I wanted to be a paleontologist. But then I was like, well, if you do visual effects, you can create dinosaurs. You're not just digging up dinosaur bones. I thought that was just awesome. And I got really into Ray Harryhausen, partially because, like I said, I watched all the movies with my grandfather and was really into stop motion. And for a while, I wanted to do that. So I always had a vested interest in it. At some point, I realized, though, that ultimately, the director's the one who says, well, this is what the creature's going to look like, and this is what it's going to do. And like I wanted that to be me. Like I didn't want someone else telling me like what the creature's going to do. So that kind of drifted me into directing. But then when I went to film school, naturally, like all my short film ideas, they had monsters and creatures and effects in it. And I had to learn how to do it myself because you're in film school and you don't have any other real options for that, at least not the school I went to. And going from that, like that's how I just started working because I got really good in After Effects, and that led to, you know, my first paid job out of school, which is actually just doing titles for, you know, commercials. And I've done a lot of commercial work. I've only worked on a few feature films and done like major. I think the biggest films I've worked on, especially from a horror perspective, is like VHS Viral. You know, I'm good friends with Greg Bishop, and I worked on his segment, Dante the Great, and I also did some shots for his upcoming Siren. But I've just always been really interested in visual effects, and yeah, I think that answers the question, hopefully.
Thank you. The Neon Dead had the original title, Invasion of the Undead. Please tell me why the change in film title.
Yeah, the change was, that's purely credited to Wild Eye Releasing. And I love the new title. First of all, like, the title, Invasion of the Undead, like, I suck at titles. If you look at my filmography for stuff I've directed, like, my titles are not very good. Like, Troll Picnic, Jake and Julie versus the Boogeyman. Like, it's just kind of goofy stuff, because I'm terrible with titles. And they wanted to change it because they felt Invasion of the Undead, it could have been mistaken for like a 50s horror sci-fi movie, and that definitely is not the vibe of it at all. Although it does have a retro aesthetic, I don't think it's quite that retro. So they came up with the Neon Dead, and it was actually filmmaker Richard Griffin. He just told me that he was the one who came up with it. And I think it's cool because like Evil Dead was such a huge influence, and this is like, you know, it's like Neon Dead. It's kind of like the same thing, and it just really captures like Evil Dead and then 80s. So I think it's a great title. But yeah, they want to appeal to a wider audience, basically.
Thank you, and I actually happen to love your titles.
Yeah, thank you. They're an acquired taste.
Yeah, I must ask, did Nicholas Refn beat you to the punch by choosing the Neon Demon as a film title?
I'm not really sure because I don't know when they coined that title. I'm not entirely sure. Like I think Richard, or rather Wild Eye, told me they were thinking about it back in May. And I'm sure he had the title The Neon Demon before that. Like, I'm sure that was his original title going in. So I want to say yes, but I don't know for sure. But yeah, I think maybe he kind of did beat us to it because the original title was Invasion of the Undead.
Yeah, that was actually meant as a joke because, the titles are just so kind of, similar in comparison.
Right. They actually delayed the release slightly because they didn't want the two movies to be confused. Because originally we were supposed to come out this summer, or, like last month or whatever. But because like the Neon Demon was coming out, they thought it would take a lot of the thunder from the Neon Dead, which is a good choice in my opinion.
On your project Neon Dead, you served as visual effects artist, writer, director, and editor. How did you adapt to all of these responsibilities at once?
Well, what made it easier is I was my own boss, so I was kind of doing things on my own schedule. But it's just, when I went to film school, again, like that's kind of, how I was taught is you go through all the different roles. So it wasn't like a major leap, especially because I was making short films, and on short films I was doing all of the same things. I think the key is to not, like when I'm directing, I don't want to be running the camera. I don't want to be thinking about anything else other than directing because it takes all your attention. So I think it's just kind of going into the mindset of whatever specific task you're working in at that time versus trying to do it all at once. I think that's when you can start making missteps, which is not to say that I didn't with the movie because I'm sure they're there, but I like to think that I managed everything well, hopefully.
And I must say The Neon Dead is a very clever movie. A lot of imagination and creativity was put into it. What was the comical moment experienced while filming this movie?
A comical moment. We stayed in really good spirits the whole time. Like, the thing is, like, probably different from other movies is that, or maybe not, I'm not sure, but on our set especially, like, the core crew, we have been working together for so long, and I couldn't legitimately say, like, they're my best friends in the world. Like, Greg I've known for years, Dylan the same. Marie was kind of new, she plays Alice, and Greg's Desmond, and Dylan is Jake. But we all just got along so well, and Nick Lowinger, my DP, I went to film school with him, and I had Eric Davis helping me out. He was a friend from high school, so it was very it felt like, it was obviously a lot of work because there were long days when at the end of it you're still making a movie, but because we all got along so well, there were always jokes flying, back and forth. I think the most comical thing for me, and this is probably going to make me sound like a jerk, I don't know, but we had one situation, and Greg might hate me for sharing this, but it's fine. We had one situation, it's a scene where Dylan, this is a spoiler, when Dylan gets possessed, and he's a son of Zaytax, and he attacks Desmond and Allison, rather. And we had put a sound blanket down on the floor to, catch the ambient sound. And Greg was worried because Dylan had to run in, and Dylan couldn't see with his makeup on because it was covering his eyes. And Greg was like, he's going to trip, we can't have the sound blanket. But Dylan was like, no, it's totally fine, I got this, no problem. So I was like, all right, Dylan says it's fine. My thing is, if the actor says it's fine, they're a grown adult, I'm not going to worry about it. We're just going to go with it. So we run the next take, and sure enough, Dylan runs in, he's fine, but Greg immediately trips on the sound blanket and hits his head on a doorknob and gets a concussion.
Oh, wow.
And we were like, oh my God, what is going on? And, I checked with him, and he was like, yes, let's just keep going, We didn't know it was a concussion at the time at all. He was weird. He was a little loopy, and that's the part that was funny in a terrible way. He was just a little strange, but then as soon as the camera was rolling, he was in character, perfect. The acting was great, and it's a great scene in the movie acting wise. And we didn't find out until the next day that he actually had a concussion. That was one of the funnier stories. I can share another one that might make me seem less of a masochist or whatever. So in between takes, lights and everything would take a long time, obviously, even on a low budget movie like this, we're trying to get a look right. So Marie, she started playing this game with the crew where she was throwing down these pencil spoons. She was throwing down spoons, and you have to guess this number. And lots of the crew was getting so mad because they didn't understand how people were getting the number right, because it didn't seem related to the amount of spoons that were being thrown on the floor. It was very strange. Everyone was getting kind of angry. And then eventually they told us the secret is that you have to look at the person's fingers when they throw the spoons down. Maybe this is a popular game, I don't know. But if they hold down 4 fingers as they throw down the spoons, the answer is 4. And I was like, oh, okay. And we liked that so much, we actually incorporated it into the Girl Scout scene later in the movie. After, Zaytax is coming to this dimension, we cut to Ashley Amberson and her Girl Scout troop, and that's the game they're playing at the front. At the beginning of that scene is that spoons game, and that's just because we had the production and we had fun playing it, and it kind of pissed a lot of people off too.
Thank you so much for sharing those stories. What were your source of inspiration for the film? I know you've mentioned, all the movies you've seen before that you really love. You mentioned Evil Dead. Did you have any other sources of inspiration?
Yeah, the movie is definitely a mashup of a lot of different genres. My two biggest inspirations in terms of tone, and I may be the only person who will ever say this, but I love Waxwork 2, Lost in Time, and I love House 2, The Second Story. I love those movies because they're so much fun. They jump around between different genres, like Waxwork 2 especially, because it has the whole sword fight, which is what we were doing. Those were very huge tonal inspirations. And then, of course, Evil Dead, Sam Raimi, I've always been drawn to his films and his style, so I think a lot of that's definitely in there. And in terms of lighting, as you can probably guess, I love Mario Bava, I love Dario Argento, and that whole creep show look, too, just using a very, stylized, colored lighting. Which was actually, I didn't even think of it as being neon. I thought it was more just, comic book, totally creep show. But obviously it is neon lighting too. So they were huge influences. I'm sure there's a lot of other little things I could point out. Not just movies too, but video games were a major influence. A lot of it when we were making this, and the script was really too ambitious for the budget that we had. It was what can we do just to make it fun? We're not going to have all the money in the world to really sell these effects. We just got to make it fun and entertaining. And the idea to have the bad guys flicker when they get hit like in a video game, like that came from that. It's just how can we make this more fun for an audience to watch? That's why when you see the Sons of Zaytax get hit by Desmond, Jake, or Allison, they'll flicker, and like Zaytax flickers at the end like a boss in a video game. So just those little touches like that. Because video games are a huge influence, as well, in addition to movies.
Thank you. And I actually love that about the movie. I loved how it seemed comical, but also dark at the same time. Like it didn't lose its dark nature, and I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, that's always hard to do in a horror comedy. I think you really got to balance it, and I think the trick is, if you look at a Ghostbusters or an American Werewolf in London, like the horror comedy classics, which obviously we're all aspiring to as horror comedy filmmakers, but they treat the horror very seriously. And for the most part, that's what we did, is that all the horror characters were serious, and that kept it dark, whereas the humor kind of arose more from the human characters' reaction to the horror.
While we're on the characters, I would like to talk more about them. Were these characters inspired at all by other characters, or were they all completely made up?
I don't think any writer can say they completely made up a character. I mean, just being in the world and absorbing different films and stories, you're going to make a hodgepodge. And I wrote the first draft of The Neon Dead back when I was a freshman in college. That's when I wrote the very first draft of it. And I loved Bill Murray movies. I loved Vince Vaughn and Swingers and Maid, and I loved Bruce Campbell. So I think Desmond is kind of an amalgamation of those three characters put together. Like Bankman from Ghostbusters, Vince Vaughn and Swingers, and Bruce Campbell, Ash, Evil Dead, definitely. Jake, I really just needed kind of a more straight, like the straight man who knows all the supernatural to play off of Desmond. That was just kind of a natural, thing that you normally see in a lot of horror movies. That's really where Jake came from. And then Allison, I didn't realize this until after I'd written her, but if you actually look at her, she's a lot like Princess Zelda in the Zelda cartoon from the 80s, which I watched when I was a kid. Really, the whole dynamic between Desmond and Allison is very similar to Link and Zelda. That's another surprising inspiration, I think. Yeah. It's like if you look back and watch it, like it's there. And I didn't even realize that until, honestly, I watched the cartoon, like, at some point after I finished the movie, I was like, oh, wow, this is totally where I got that from consciously.
In the Zaytax character, I feel there was more to him that didn't really come out in the film. Would you care to elaborate more on this background story?
Sure. What specifically? I mean, I could talk about Zaytax for sure, where I was coming from when I created him. Is that what the question is?
Well, yeah, pretty much like more of his background story, because I didn't really see much of that in the film per se. Right.
Zaytax is basically an extra-dimensional demon. I look at him as kind of like, a Cthulhu, like a Lovecraftian monster. Obviously, though, we're not going the full Lovecraft, where you can't look at him and go crazy, and the movie's not really played to be scary, but he's more just like this unknowable, extra-dimensional entity from a world that's totally outside of our own, that Drake Hillstead contacts to get power, as you see in the movie, but it kind of backfires on him because Zaytax is, evil and doesn't really care about humans at all.
Thank you. Dead by Midnight looks to be your next project, slated for 2017, but I'm not seeing much information on it. Can you please shed some light on this television series?
Absolutely. It's not, I know it's credited on IMDb as a television series, but it is going to be a web series, and we're producing it for U42, which is a company. They have an office here in Atlanta, and one in LA, and one in Charleston. And they're launching a new app, kind of like a Netflix, and Dead by Midnight is going to be their first original series. So I'm collaborating on it with a few different local filmmakers. And it's going to start Aaron Brown, Misty Monday from way back when. And there's 7 episodes, and our wraparound is about this kind of down on its luck television studio, and they're about to, lose everything. They're about to go bankrupt, and they have this annual Halloween special. So they hire this kind of mysterious Elvira-type hostess to run the Halloween special. And as they're watching the movies that she presents, which are individual stories, it's an anthology series, so every episode has a different story, although this wraparound kind of carries across all of them. But as they're watching these, they start to realize that people in the town are disappearing and they're showing up in individual segments. They have to find out what's going on and stop her before she ends up kind of destroying the entire town. And it's meant to be so that every episode is actually kind of a slightly different style of horror. And this is the project I was kind of alluding to earlier when you asked me the monster question, is they're going to get darker as they go along. So our first episode is a horror comedy, whereas the last episode is kind of a straight-up horror movie. That's the one I'm directing. And the episode's going to be titled Blindside, and I'm trying to be scary and suspenseful in this one, which is something I was not really doing in Neon Dad at all. I was really just trying to make a fun, entertaining movie. But for this one, I'm definitely trying to be dark and disturbing, and we'll see how it turns out. I'm going to give it my best shot.
Very exciting, and I cannot wait to check it out. Are there any other projects that you are working on for the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely like to plug a few of the projects I've been working on for some friends. First, I want to mention, I'm sure many of your listeners and readers are familiar with it, but Frankenstein Created Bikers by James Bicker, shot on 35mm film. I did some of the visual effects for it, and it's a total, like, if you love exploitation movies, this is your movie to see. Like, it's a mashup of every exploitation movie ever made. Like, the list of stuff that he put in this movie is just insane. So definitely check that out. I know it's playing the festival circuit right now. I'm about to get started on some visual effects for Richard Griffin's next film, A Midsummer Night's Dream, the Shakespeare play. And hopefully going to be getting some stop motion, but definitely just some random visual effects, because he wants to have like a very kind of psychedelic feel, different from other adaptations. And also a web series I finished up last year, I definitely want to mention Suspensions of Disbelief. If you're into fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons, you should really check it out. It's a really clever premise because it kind of follows the non-player characters in a fantasy world and how they interact with the heroes. And they don't like the heroes because they kind of trash everything. I edited all those episodes and did some special effects for it, or visual effects, and I think it's a great show. I wish it would get more attention, so I definitely hope some people check that out. And also Sirens coming out soon, Greg Bishop, based on the first segment in the first VHS movie. And I did a few visual effects for that, mostly cleanup, but I did go to the premiere screening in Atlanta, and I'll just say, like, it was amazing. Like, it was a great film. It really surprised me how good it was. So I definitely encourage everyone to check that out when it comes out. If you're on the fence about it, 'cause it's like, well, it's an extended, version of the short. How good could it be? But it is really, really good. I was just blown away by it.
Thank you. I will definitely check those out. The Neon Dead will be available for purchase on September 13th. Please share how consumers can get access and or purchase the film, your website, and anything you care to add on your film.
Oh, absolutely. It will be available on Amazon. Just search for The Neon Dead. We're up for pre-order now on DVD, and it'll be on VOD. I'm not sure what other distribution outlets it's going to go through, but you can find them on Wild Eye's website. They're a distributor, and they're just wildeyeReleasing.com. They will probably be a better source of, like I said, for the distribution, because they're the ones handling it.
Thank you. I, for one, cannot wait to purchase the DVD. Well, Mr. Haas, I would like to thank you again for taking the time to meet with me today.
I'm just so excited to even have this opportunity with this little movie we made, very independently, very low budget. Just to see it getting out there and even to be getting an interview like this is pretty amazing and pretty humbling. So totally thank you so much for doing this.
Good luck, and I wish you well in your endeavors. My name is Stacy Cox, staff correspondent for DecayMag.com.